Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Trialogues podcast. My name is Gaylord DeWald, and I'm coming to you from the Howard Space Center in Burlington, Vermont. I have with me my good friends Rob Hahn and Matthew Shadbolt. Rob, why don't you say hi?
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's good to be with y'all on another lovely Ricochet recording day. Our theme of the day is positivity. I can't wait. It's going to be awesome.
Hey everyone, it's Matthew calling in from Manhattan in New York. And yes, today's theme is going to be all about innovation and positivity and what we're excited about for the new year. So as 2012 comes to a close, we're sort of thinking ahead with the things that we're actually excited about. Right, Gaylord?
Yeah. And so I'll start out with something kind of funny and fun up here. In Burlington, Vermont, we use Twitter a bunch, and we have this hashtag, which is BTV, and we've been using it for years. And just like the usual stuff, like, hey, there's a car wreck on I-89, don't take the road, and all the the fun stuff that's happening in town. And then, but recently, Bloomberg TV decided that they wanted to start using, hash BTV because for some reason they thought that would be a good idea. And so yesterday they were having a big event, and they were kind of trying to promote, like, oh, everybody use this BTV hashtag. And all the people in Burlington were like, oh, come on, you guys. Like, this is, like, our space or whatever. So we kind of ended up just doing a kind of a deluge of tweets about how awesome Burlington, Vermont is during that time frame. And, the TV news, the Bloomberg guys, weren't let's just say that, like, I analyzed all the data of all the tweets as sort of like a case study, and they didn't generate a lot of interest, in their thing. So my positive thing that I've been thinking about in regards to that is, like, how community operates in a digital space, and particularly like how this, the community that I'm in, which is a generally fairly creative crew up here, responds and deals with, a situation that, could have been dealt with, in a way that wasn't as effective. So it's kind of it's sort of a funny story. I mean, the main thing is, like, some people were upset about, like, oh, well, they should have asked or whatever, but it's Twitter. You don't own a hashtag or anything. Anybody can come in and do stuff. But especially how, ultimately, like, when I was running the numbers on it, like, how ineffective the Bloomberg stuff was. It was like, 4 guys and a couple gals up in Burlington, Vermont managed to generate more interesting and genuine and actual conversation than, a TV news show. So that was kind of fun.
So what is the result of that? Is Bloomberg TV going to back off from using the hashtag, or?
No. They said, some of the reporters, the local reporters, of course, have been having a great time with it, with this as a story. And they contacted Bloomberg News, and their spokespeople there said, no, we're going to continue to use BTV, to promote special events or whatever. So I expect them to continue to use it, but it's just, they're not generating really that much annoying, chatter on this particular hashtag. It's not like it's the first time we've had something happen. Like, when in the Arab Spring in Bahrain, it was the same kind of thing. They were complaining about Bahrain TV using the hashtag BTV, which, obviously flooded our hashtag with their stuff. And, for good reason, right? They had a really important cause that they were concerned about. But, we found a way to deal with it then. And in this case, the Bloomberg TV, as far as, like, overshadowing the actual usefulness of the way the people in Burlington have been using that channel is, it's just not even really an issue in many ways, because it's like some of it, relates to that some of that third screen stuff or second screen stuff we've been talking about, sure. Because people do like to watch TV and have a social thing open, like that's something that's true, but the reality is, like, in a lot of cases, people don't interact, right? And this is the case here. Like, of the the tweets that were on topic for Bloomberg News, most of them were just Bloomberg News talking about themselves and retweeting themselves from other accounts that they own. It's kind of like I don't know if you saw that Onion post about or the Onion video that was like a TED Talk spoof, and it's about social media. And halfway through it, he talks about like, well, first we'll get a bunch of bots to follow our bots, and then eventually the bots will be talking to each other, and all we have to do is cash our check. It's kind of like that. Like if you look at sort of the nature of the traffic that's being generated by the Bloomberg stuff, but it's not even a lot of bots. So it's sort of it's interesting in a lot of ways.
It's sort of like a particularly modern problem, the need to feel a sense of protection over a hashtag, that's used by a community pool of people. It's like I'm not going to go as far as to call it a first world problem, but it's a particularly new thing that people seem to be experiencing. The sort of overlap between hashtags.
And it
doesn't seem like there's room for all, when it comes to that kind of thing. People are like, no, this is our little area of turf, and we're sort of fiercely going to defend it, even at the expense of interfering with your use of it,
Right.
As happened yesterday.
Yeah. I'm just wondering when, Under Armour is going to come out with like some, branded, keyboards or iPod covers that says something like, protect this hashtag.
Right. Like, this is Vermont. There's probably already a T-shirt press grinding out T-shirts and everything. I mean, this is like par for the course for us. I don't know if you guys remember the Eat More Kale guy getting sued by the Chick-fil-A because his slogan has been "Eat More Kale" for a long time. This stuff is just normal for us, right? Like this is like not a big deal. And I think it is kind of a first world problem. There are some serious implications, like during Irene, which was kind of Vermont's version of the Sandy storm. Like we got totally obliterated during Tropical Storm Irene. People were using the BTV hashtag as a way to like find out like, does the road to this town exist or not? So it does get used to some degree in real and practical issues. And having some other kind of source of noise might diminish that somewhat. But generally speaking, it's not that like Bloomberg isn't. They're not being very effective at what they're doing.
But
so it's not a big deal.
Especially when that noise is sort of cannibalistic in nature, where it's just retweeting itself. That doesn't really serve any purpose to anyone, especially the people doing it.
And in a branding sense, like they could, the BTV is just sort of, it creates a little more cognitive dissonance for them anyway, because people in New York that I talk to don't say, oh yeah, I'm watching BTV today. They'll say I'm watching Bloomberg. BTV itself doesn't relate very, if you look at their logo on their screen, it doesn't say BTV, it's just a B. So, and I don't know if they're trying to align themselves more with the television as a device, or if they would rather align themselves more with other kinds of, devices. So it sort of doesn't really help them in any way. In many ways, it uses up 4 characters in their tweet that they don't really need, in order to have the kinds of conversations that they're talking about, right? So
I have a feeling. I mean, I actually don't know this, but I have a feeling I know why they did that. It sounds a little odd, but I have a feeling they did that to trigger trading algorithms. Do you guys know about this, like whole trading algorithm business?
No, I want to hear about it.
So, I mean, it's something that I picked up on some of the like finance and investing sites that I go to, and it's one of these things. I think there was a TED Talk a while back about this, talking about how algorithms are like taking over our lives. But one of the points that was made about it is that the big, like Wall Street investment banks and the big hedge funds, a lot of them, their business nowadays has nothing to do, with what we think of as, stock market, right? I want to buy 300 shares of Apple or whatever. Apparently, a lot of it is just this computerized, quantitative, algorithms, these giant machines that sit through and crunch through all sorts of data and make, millisecond, microsecond decisions and buy and sell and whatever. Now, apparently some of these algorithms track news stories to try and pick up keywords, right? Now, it's probably some really intense, unstructured data analysis that somehow feeds into algorithm decision-making, but I have a feeling they might have some to do with that just because Bloomberg, obviously Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg media is so concerned with investors and finance,
Right.
it may be that they were just tweeting this stuff out in hopes that it's going to get picked up by trading algos, right? Because the hashtag BTV, and then maybe the trading algos would do something, maybe Bloomberg TV reports like Apple earnings, up whatever, and then, a millisecond later, some Morgan Stanley bot executes a $2 billion trade. I mean, it could be something like that, right? Because you're right. I mean, it seems odd that they wouldn't have researched it,
Well, they did. They did, actually. One of the news reporters, asked them, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we were aware of it. We just decided to use it anyway." So
which makes sense if you're only targeting computer algorithms.
Yeah.
And they're looking for specific keywords. So if you guys up in Burlington talking about Highway 89, the trading algorithm ignores that. But if it's hashtag BTV and it's talking about, Alcoa releases new, aluminum ore or something, that, like that'll have significance. I don't know.
Wouldn't it make sense if the algo is watching that, why wouldn't it just follow Bloomberg's regular channel?
That's true. Who knows? I mean,
it would be faster to actually just follow the source of the news, right?
Right. Because that's an interesting, because people, gone back and forth. One of the reporters talked to the Bloomberg, and they're like, "Oh, well, our goal is to generate smart conversation," which I can tell you right now, based on the data, they weren't very effective at that, right?
Define smart. Define smart, though, right?
Actually, even if you define it as conversation, we don't even have to get into the qualitative part about smart conversation.
Unless what they mean by conversation is, like 17, supercomputers talking to each other at, sub-millisecond speeds.
yeah, exactly. So they weren't really good at it. But the idea, because that's what I've been trying to figure out. I'm like, okay, in what universe could the data of what they're doing, could someone in good conscience go to their boss and say, "Hey, I'm doing a great job with the resources you've given me," and I'm just not seeing it anywhere. But this trading algo idea, right, exactly. This trading algo could be a good one. It could be a good one.
But what's interesting about what you said, though, Gaylord, is what you're saying fits in exactly with kind of my, what I'm excited about. And I don't know that this is any sort of new innovation, but I guess it just really struck me recently, as I was thinking about, this podcast is, I'm just really excited about kind of I don't even know what to call it, like the pushing down of power, and the example you're giving, like Bloomberg Television versus, 6 people in Burlington, Vermont, right? But at least over Twitter, you guys actually have an advantage over Bloomberg. Yeah, and I guess this came up in another conversation I was involved with, talking about like cable TV and how crappy it is and whatnot. And somehow that conversation went into this whole discussion about just how inexpensive, really good quality like cameras are now. Maybe 10 years ago, in order to have like a broadcast quality camera, it was like $200,000 for the camera. Whereas now they're saying you could do this on a, $500, combination camera / camcorder, and, you think about some of the most interesting videos coming out of, things like Sandy. A lot of it is just, Apple iPhone video or, like there's all this technology, there's all this power that's kind of just being pushed down, lower and lower and lower. What kind of made me think was, like, you guys know, like my nature is to sit and brood about, potential problems and, what's wrong. And you look at the Gen Y and, the unemployment rates and whatnot. And I'm kind of like thinking, maybe that's not a problem if the Gen Y actually has capabilities for production that doesn't require them to have a job, right? So, for example, like some of the stuff that we do, like a computer isn't that expensive, fax machines not expensive. It's not like we need to go sit in some big high-rise office anymore. A lot of these young guys nowadays, they have creativity and they have skills and they have other things where they're not really looking for a job because they have all of the tools at their disposal, to do whatever it is they want to do, right? And I just think there's something kind of neat about that. The idea that, it's almost like this return to, like the family farms of old. Or maybe it's not a family farm. Maybe it's more like a family web design company, or maybe it's a family, programming shop or family manufacturing. I know there's some cool technology that might make that possible. But, overall, I guess I was just thinking about saying, this is nothing new. We've been headed in this way for probably, 20 years, but it does feel like we're kind of at this cusp where I could very easily imagine, 2 or 3 people, like somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but they still have fiber optic connections to the internet. They have all the telecommunications they need. And the stuff, the capital equipment that they need is just not that expensive. So they can make a living and they can be productive and, do something, for themselves or for society. I think that's kind of cool.
What I think is happening, Rob, to your point, because I definitely see it too, is there's starting to become real critical mass behind the democratization of the tools to produce things, and that's lower prices or lower barrier for entry to produce high quality results, and like cameras is a great example. And the ability to make like a simple web commerce site. The barrier for entry to that is so low that it's not even a barrier anymore. And then you've got a democratization of access as well. There's
right.
more access than ever before. So to the point where there's so much access and so many opportunities for creation and distribution, and we're starting to see that spill over to places where the internet has not traditionally been, like China and the third world, Africa in particular, as the internet itself expands into those kind of territories. There's this huge democratization of people being able to build amazing things, and at scale, that's a really, really exciting thing. But what happens is that you get, as we know from our conversations about social and things like that, along with that comes a lot of noise. If you have the ability to make stuff, what inevitably happens is that there's a lot of really, really bad stuff that gets made that never sees the light of day, or doesn't, it has access and distribution, but it doesn't necessarily make it, interesting or good or, any kind of qualitative type of discussion. But what happens is that the things that, we're seeing sort of come back, to use your analogy of sort of the farming analogy, is the rise of things like sort of artisan production. I think it's no secret that something like Etsy is now insanely popular. Yeah. The ability for people to hand make things is sort of back in style, if you like, as opposed to the manufacturing of those things. And where it starts to converge for me, and we're starting to see this here in New York because a store just opened that allows people to do this, is something that I'm really, really excited for 2013, which is that 3D printing is now starting to hit that sort of mass adoption. We're reading, in the press over the last couple of weeks that Staples is going to offer 3D printing in store, which is amazing, I think. And it sort of feels like, how film processing was, where you would sort of take you'd take your film to the lab and they would do it for you, and then you'd come in a couple of days later and then you'd walk away with it. It's sort of at that stage.
Wait, you guys don't do that anymore? I still do.
But I'm saying, like you would maybe have something that you've made like online that's like a model of something, right? Or something that you wanted to print out, and then you would take it to Staples and they print it for you, and then you walk away from the store. But it's not at that point where you do it at home. Yeah, that's really what I'm saying, right?
Well, it is if you got enough money.
If you got enough money, but to your point, Rob, about access and distribution, the 3D printing is still, at that place where you were trying to draw the parallels with the camera and production. But 3D printing is sort of coming to that point of mass adoption, and I think next year seems to be the year that's really going to be a thing that people do. And I can see, just things like collectibles or making making anything.
Well, individual parts, right? Like, how many times do we have something that we love, and it's like, oh, this tiny little part broke off.
Absolutely.
And you could just like download the part from the manufacturer and print it out.
I think it's revolutionary. I think 3D printing is absolutely revolutionary.
It's amazing.
Because it democratizes the manufacturing process. There's a store in New York where you can print out a bike, and they assemble it for you in the store based on your design. They assemble it for you in the way that like Nike ID works, if you know that, where you sort of design your shoe online and then it goes to the factory, they build it and send it to you. You can sort of do that with a bike here in Manhattan, and then they print it all out using one of these 3D printers, assemble it for you, and then you just go pick it up and write it off. And it's really kind of, for me, it's still. We were talking about this in the call beforehand with Lindsay. It still feels like science fiction to me to be able to, watch something carve its way out of like a block of plastic, and then you walk away with the thing that you made. It still seems kind of fantastic to me, and I think it's really, really exciting because, Gaylor, to your point, the idea of having to go buy a widget from the hardware store or something, you can be able to, you just download it from maybe like HomeDepot.com and then print out, the thing that you need for your kitchen or something like that. I think it's absolutely amazing,
And except that you won't actually need HomeDepot.com because a lot of those designs could be just put in the public domain. By
I think there'll be a ton of that stuff. I think it'll be both sides. I think it'll be both. Like there'll be models, these 3D models that work and have been vetted and curated by a HomeDepot.com or whatever. And then there'll be like the homegrown stuff that maybe works, maybe doesn't. But it's in the same way that you can buy a manufactured product today or you can buy an Etsy product today. I think there'll be both. And part of what's really fascinating about it is kind of looping it back to Rob was talking about it kind of in terms of and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of in terms of like, the U.S. economy. And I think that there's some really fascinating aspects of 3D printing technology because basically what we're doing is changing the manufacturing chain from being one large factory located someplace, which is, it seems to be typically is less expensive to locate it somewhere else. And it's also kind of refashioning the logistics chain. You no longer have to run it through a port, put it on a truck, drive it around, and expend a ton of fuel doing so. And that has like the potential to be like really change the face of how commerce operates, from one of like make widgets someplace, ship them, and move them. And I think in some cases that could be scary, right? You go, oh no, we're going to lose more manufacturing jobs or something like that. But I think there's going to be more room for kind of a return to, before the 1900s, most people didn't have a day job or work in a factory. Like they either worked on a farm, as we were talking about, or they worked in a small business. Like most people, I think, lived above their shop or whatever. And it's kind of a realigning, and this kind of technology encourages that. And I think there's tons of room for innovative thinking in that area. I'm really excited about it.
Me too. But it's part of the entire trend, right, of sort of the, strengthening of the individual, strengthening of the small. That, like Etsy is a good example, I think, in some ways. Like if I wanted a pot, now it might cost me more or, whatever, but fact is I could get something from, a one or two man shop, that I don't have to rely on Walmart. I don't have to do it, but I have the option, if I wanted to.
Right.
And something like 3D printing, I think, totally changes potentially the entire cost structure, of all of that. So, yeah, it's revolutionary. It's exciting. And I think we're starting to – what's interesting about 3D printing and all of this is, I feel like we've all been guinea pigs. We've all lived through maybe 20 years of sort of social experimentation of what happens with – sort of the democratization when it comes to things like content, when it comes to digital goods, when it comes to, those types of things, right? Like, maybe, and I think I made this point a while back at some Inman or another, where I said, maybe 30 years ago, if you wanted to make music, right, you needed a lot of equipment, a lot of really expensive equipment, like a recording studio, right? Or even before that, if you wanted to make music, you needed an orchestra, or you needed a whole bunch of, professional musicians that you had to pay or whatever it is. So it's very expensive to create music. Whereas today, literally a guy in a garage could turn out music that's really professional. And I think we live through, what does that look like? What does society look like when we have, independent artists that are able to just produce their own music, distribute it, themselves, and the economic model behind that, and how they find the audience, and what then is the value of a, recording company, all of those things, So it'll be interesting to see if the lessons that we've learned by living through all of that, because you guys remember the whole file sharing and Napster and, all the digital rights management and all this stuff. It'll be really interesting to see how that translates to the physical world,
What it does, Rob, is it starts to disintermediate businesses that are solely predicated on distribution. Like Gaylord mentioned before, like if your whole business is predicated on logistics, getting a product that you don't make to an audience, that you sort of, take
that you don't even sell to.
That you don't even sell to, right? It starts to disintermediate you as a business. And you see that with the record companies. They're completely disintermediated by the likes of iTunes and digital right management and file sharing and things like that. So much so that it actually makes artist development, which is sort of one of the things that record companies did support, it makes it a lot harder for them to actually do that, which makes sort of, the rising of sort of new music as perpetuated by the record companies, a lot tougher, because the economics of it are different. But it also, I think the one that is due for the biggest shakeup is cable distribution. They're basically, they don't make TV programs, and they're really, in the distribution of content game, and when people are able to access the kind of high-quality programming that you're talking about, either from people making it themselves or having like an HBO have those kind of programs available for free on their website that you stream into your TV or something like that, in similar ways that sort of people like Louis C.K. have been exploring this year. It starts to disintermediate, people that sell tickets or sell distribution or, get services to your house. And I think that's of tremendous benefit to the customer at the end of the day. It's like a multi-billion-dollar a year industry that's sort of long overdue for a shake-up. One of the pet peeves I have is the hundreds of channels that I never watch that I pay for every month. I don't speak Spanish, but I have over 100 Spanish channels that I have access to as part of my cable package that I would gladly swap for one Showtime, and it's that the ability to have sort of a la carte programming. I don't see them sort of moving towards that model. I see models of like faster distribution or more access or like faster web speeds into your house. I see the model
Matthew,
moving more that way.
There's a bill that was just introduced. I want to say it's in the House, but it might be the Senate. Because the reason why you have to pay for all the Spanish language channels and all of that is because, legislation does not allow for unbundling. Apparently, like FCC regulations don't allow for that. Right? So I think there's legislation that was just introduced to allow that to happen because, the infrastructure is there, right? And I think, the way I imagine it is I don't see the cable companies being in other words, the cable operators, right? The Time Warners, the Comcast, those guys, I don't see them really being troubled by it because what they'll do is they'll just charge you for the pipe. Because they still own the actual fiber or the actual copper into your house.
They own the cable to your house, or they own how it gets to your house.
Until Google Fiber comes to you.
So just like internet access, I looked at it the other day. I think I'm paying more for internet access now than I am for the TV.
Well, I certainly feel like I use internet access more than I do TV.
Right, and quite frankly, if my TV went down, I don't think it would bother me that much. Or if my internet went down, I'm on the phone, with Comcast right away, right? So I figure those guys will just, start metering us. They'll start charging you for like per gigabyte or whatever, right? I think it's the content. So it's not the Time Warner cable. It's more the, the Time Warner like studios and the TV, those guys. I think they're the ones who are going to have a lot more difficulty because now, if it's not bundled, you have to convince each person to subscribe to you. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I would like to see that sort of unbundling legislation come through.
It's interesting that this year, YouTube has been trying to make headway into the premium programming world, where they're trying to position YouTube as a product for the home as opposed to the computer, right? And it's interesting how few people know about that. I mean,
right.
I have never watched any of that particular programming, however good it may or may not be, and I don't know of conversations about that particular type of proprietary programming. But it's going to need to take, like you said, like a Time Warner Studios or, maybe like an AMC or an HBO or something like that to make that sort of fully digital move in order to try and get other people to make that move as well. But I don't see, any of the big guys making headway into that space, in aggressive ways at all, right?
Right.
I've got something to throw into the mix a little bit on this. There's because what we're looking at there is just like how do the existing business models realign so that content still gets made and delivered and somebody gets paid, right? And I've got a client that I've worked with for many years that does children's cartoon and a children's product, and in the course of working on that, one of the things that I always find fascinating is like someone making a cartoon for television, like they get paid an amount of money that usually just barely covers the cost of actually making it, making the device itself or the content. And then the money is made in all the merchandise, all the royalties and licensing. And obviously, I think this is something that's more specific to children's programming, perhaps, than the other stuff. But the licensing is really where the money is in kids programming, which kind of, in a funny way, ties it to this 3D printer idea in a lot of ways. Because what happens in a children's TV show kind of contract is that they'll kind of front you the money probably the same way as like a book royalty, right? Enough money to just barely scrape by and get the thing made. And then the network will take usually a very large percentage of merchandise royalties. And so the idea is, okay, well, we can get the thing made and then, we're going to live on the 20% or less that's left to us by the network. And so the network is making its money as well on this merchandising side of it. And so I wonder to some degree, like we're kind of talking about it from two different angles. One is the pipe running in and out of the house. One of them, and then the other one is where does the merchandise come from? And how do you make money on obviously you can make money on selling the files. iTunes does it. But there's other kinds of like interesting sort of ways where like if we're just talking about how do we get quality content into the house, and we're looking at Rob, like you'd mentioned, that the cost of gear and making stuff is decreasing, and then you're throwing in just the democratization of things where it's like graphic design in the late 80s was full of garbage because like there were a bunch of people who didn't ever know anything about design and designing stuff in Comic Sans and newsletters and all kinds of other garbage. But then eventually the stuff comes around, right? And people like develop a sense of taste or sense of taste change, and suddenly Comic Sans is acceptable. I don't know. Let's hope that never occurs. But that kind of stuff. I think it's really fascinating.
And I think there's another answer to that, which, with respect to content at least. And I think we start to see this, really infuse into other areas of our life as well. I actually think the content delivery model of the future is exactly the one that the video game industry has realized. Right? And it's unfortunately not the one that the music industry never really got on top of. What do I mean by that? So back, and even to this day, I guess, to some extent, when people think about video games, they think about going to the store, right, and buying a box and then buying the game, right? So, Call of Duty just came out, Black Ops 2. They spent tens of millions of dollars promoting this thing. And, you had lines outside of Best Buy and all these gamers, they went in and they cleaned out the shelves the first day, et cetera, right? Of course, what's really fascinating about that is I could go online and buy it as a digital download, and I never have to step foot outside my house.
Right.
So all that they were doing was, shelving, whatever. It's just marketing. It's just product placement. It's just generating buzz. But the actual delivery could be done, just over the Internet. The companies that have really figured out how to make sustainable, ongoing, real money are actually people like Blizzard with World of Warcraft, where there is actually no game, no file. There's no content actually being delivered to you. It's more that you have access to their content, right? So that's something they can control. So I would imagine something like, I don't know how the Time Warner, I don't know how these guys are going to figure out how to do it. I think what they'll end up doing, though, is they'll start charging, some sort of access fee in some way, shape, or form, right? Whether it's a persistent universe or it's like this showing of Glee at this time, and everything goes to like maybe a pay-per-view type of model, or I don't know, right? But I could easily imagine something like that happening. But the flip side of it is what you see out of live music, right? Which is the record companies and a lot of these guys got so hammered in the 90s and the teens. Now it appears that all of the artists are making most of their money from concert tickets and, to your point, Gaylord, merchandise sales at concerts.
Yeah,
right?
It's been that way for a long time. But
this was something apparently the music industry had to do in response to Napster. They had to do in response to iTunes, right? Because they were just not going to make any money from record sales. They have to figure out how to make it.
To set it straight, the artists themselves were making money on the merch table way before Napster came along. So that phenomenon has just been like vastly accelerated as the sort of the collapse of the music industry, the traditional music industry, I guess, or whatever you'd want to call it. The merch table has always been where they made their money.
Yeah, and the other example that comes to mind based on your video game example and sort of pure digital delivery, Rob, is what Rovio did with Angry Birds. Obviously phenomenally successful in terms of free downloads and then paid downloads or in-app purchases. And, it's become a franchise in the real world now. I mean, you go into Target or something, there's like a wall of Angry Birds stuff, right? Angry Birds clothes, Angry Birds.
I have 7-year-old boys, so believe me, I know all about the Angry Bird merchandise.
Right, absolutely. It's
all over my wall.
But it's like you said, like a purely digital distribution. Nobody's going to the store to buy Angry Birds because that thing isn't available for consoles. It's purely a mobile form of distribution. And that's sort of it's like cutting your discussion kind of another way, where there is no physical product at all, but it becomes a physical product in terms of its popularity and how that thing is franchised. By extension, obviously there is Call of Duty franchising in terms of merchandise and stuff like that, but nowhere near the scale of something like Angry Birds.
Right? Oh yeah. No, nothing like it.
It's sort of like an interesting parallel in terms of how those things are starting to get built. But to return to the TV conversation, what's also happening in the democratization of the production and the tools is also that the extreme is happening as well, where higher production values and higher costs are happening too. Like if you look at some of the programming that's been coming out of things like Showtime or even AMC with Mad Men, Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, HBO's like Boardwalk Empire and stuff like that. Those shows
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Game of Thrones, great example. Those shows are phenomenally expensive to make, but they do allow those networks to rise above the noise in a way that perhaps something like reality TV, which has low cost and low distribution, so it sort of goes against the trend of that. So it's not that it's sort of moving one way; it's actually moving two completely separate separate ways, I think. And if you see like how somebody like NBC handled like the Olympic coverage, where they're spending a phenomenal amount of money just to even get the license to cover the Olympics,
right,
let alone the costs of the distribution and actually executing on that licensing agreement. They're leaving a lot on the table in terms of the actual distribution online to sort of return to our digital distribution strategy. And they did this sort of weird time staggering stuff this year.
Everyone hated it.
Very, very unpopular online in ways that, somebody like AMC with The Walking Dead, they are actually deliberately creating what they call second screen experiences, and they flag that to the viewer before the show starts. They say, use the AMC app, and what it will do is it will give you more information about what's going on as you watch the show. So it's almost like, back in the 90s where you would have like a pop-up video on VH1, you can actually watch it on your TV, and then it follows along in real time in the app, and it says, how difficult this scene was to film, or here's how it's different from the books, or, that
right.
kind of stuff. And it makes the experience, if you're really into that show, it makes the experience, many, many times richer. And I think that's sort of the interesting space that a lot of the networks are sort of trying to move towards, is the sort of blending of the digital distribution platforms very often simultaneously. And I think that's sort of a fascinating thing.
Right.
And some of that,
I think
it's like jumping.
I think there's no doubt.
Got a quick one.
Go ahead.
Got a quick one.
You.
All right. The part of it is in some ways just sort of reclaiming the attention, right? If we have a second screen area where people are off talking on their own on Twitter, it doesn't make any sense for me if I'm the network to have people talking on Twitter on their iPad if I can give them my own app and have them talk directly to me and interact directly with me on my content. So
what it does
it
reclaims the TV. It reclaims the TV.
Right.
Your attention is on the second screen already. It reclaims the TV as your attention. It's the other way around.
Yeah. Say that again, because I'm not getting it. I'm not getting that. What do you mean?
You're not getting what?
When the TV is on, right? The TV is on, and you have like the iPad or the iPhone in your hand. Your attention is inevitably more directed towards what you and your friends are chatting about, or you surfing the web, and the TV is in the background. What it actually does is it reclaims the TV as a source of attention that's already been relegated to the TV is the second screen, not the iPad.
Right.
We very often refer to the iPad as the second screen because we don't think of it as a screen. But what the reality for the user is that it's the other way around. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, I get it totally now. That totally makes sense.
So like the Walking Dead,
I think
like watch the show that way now.
Well, I think, Matthew, there's no doubt that, there are certain types of things that you just need mass, right? You just need some power. You need resources. You need money. You need scale, right? There's
got to lay the cable.
You got to lay the cable. That's really expensive. Something like flying people, to London, with all these cameras and certain things are always going to be the province of the big companies. The guys with a lot of money. Something like Game of Thrones is not something that Gaylord, you and I can sort of do in our spare bedroom, right? So I think there's no doubt about that. On the flip side, what's really exciting, for me, I love Game of Thrones. I love all of that stuff as well. But, I'm just really excited by stuff like Adam Carolla, right? Literally, this guy's making millions of dollars with a podcast, like just 10, and I just look at things like that and say, fact is, sometimes we have a tendency to get overly excited about the production values, right? Or about the studio, or about the 3D camera, or, like James Cameron's awesome, CGI effects. And, when you democratize technology, it almost feels to me like, at least as far as content goes, sometimes that stuff just goes out the window, and all you want is like some individual or some small group of people and their expression of just pure talent and storytelling, And I think that's really exciting. Now, here's a question for you guys, though, because, we do want to try to relate this to the real estate industry in which we all work. If we take this whole trend towards democratization and apply it to real estate, what do you guys think that looks like? Because we are seeing part of it now, right? And we are like something like IDX. I think I can very clearly argue is democratization of technology. There was a time when that would have been impossible for anyone but the very largest technology companies to do. Right? So how far does this democratization go, do you guys think?
Well, it's very often framed as a disintermediation conversation within real estate, right? It's framed as like a transparency of information kind of conversation, as opposed to, a big, wide open, white space of opportunity. And I think, even reframing the conversation away from disintermediation and more towards innovation is a struggle for some people, but perhaps it's a much needed reframing of that kind of thing.
So you can take a stab at it, like things like Etsy. That's a real positive, or like 3D printing, like positive democratization, power in the hands of the people, and this is what we ended up with. What do you think that might look like?
Well, it depends on how you define the product, right? In terms of distributing, the customer service that an agent would provide, I'm not sure. Can such a thing be democratized? I'm not sure, because it's in the hands of individuals. But
already, yeah.
It's in the hands of individuals already. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if it can be democratized, because it's probably democratized already.
Let me take a stab at this. I want to take a quick stab at it, and I'll go.
Brokerages, more towards brokerages, perhaps.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's like if you've got an Etsy of agents. What Etsy does is it aggregates together a bunch of people who make stuff and creates a marketplace of people who make stuff. And like an Etsy of real estate would be a brokerage in a way. Or it would just be a place that's like, hey, here's all of the agents in the thing. But at some level, it just turns into another weird aggregation mess all on its own. There's another I don't know that it's really like what we're really talking about is democratization. Like, I don't think that that's really the big shift that's going on here. I don't know if you guys tune into Mary Meeker's presentation that she does every year.
Which is like the Gaylord.
Yeah, because it's like that's every year. It's like for me, it's like Christmas waiting for that, because I'm just like totally. She's always dead on, and that's just the way I feel about it. And she had a whole section in her presentation this year about the end of assets. I can't remember exactly how she described it, but the idea being like an asset-less universe.
She made specific reference to things like music. People in the past collected vinyl, and then they collected CDs, and music was a thing that people had in their house as a physical object, which no longer exists. It's an entirely virtual thing. She also made reference to that, things like magazines and books, and how that kind
and hotels, right? She brought up hotels and Airbnb, where it's like, or housing is how she referred to it. It's like and I know this is one that's near and dear to Rob's general topics, but it's the idea of there's changing ideas about what is ownership versus not ownership. Like a lot of these things we're describing. We can call it democratization, but I don't think that's necessarily it. A lot of it is training to not own things. Like we have a service that we pay for as opposed to a thing that we own. We have a music service that we pay for. We have a movie service that we pay for. And I don't think some kind of threat to home ownership or whatever. I'm not sounding any kind of alarms there. But sometimes this idea of what we're doing, like the digital stuff doesn't exist. So whether we own it or don't own it, it starts to, that world gets fuzzy. And then you throw in 3D printing. It's sort of like the inverse of Nicholas Negropont's everything that can be digital will be. Now it's kind of the other way around. Everything that was digital that can be real, now it will be, Everything, I don't know. Somebody have to find a smarter way of saying that. But now it's like we put it all into the internet. We've scanned it in with 3D scanners. We've taken pictures of it. we've recorded its audio, we put the whole world in the box, and now we're going to print it all back out on these 3D printers.
It's like those people that make albums out of their Instagram photos and self-publishing and things like that. It's that. It reminds me, listening to you talk here. It's like that old adage of the most important things in life aren't things. Right. It's like that old adage, but you're absolutely right. Now that we sort of feel like we've sort of filled the internet up with everything and have a knowledge pool of everything, now it's time to actually have it repopulate the world again. And it's an ironic way.
On Mars.
in our own way. It's like, it's a sort of highly curated, personalized remix of the world or something like that.
I guess with respect to real estate topic, I was trying to think. You're right. I mean, the conversation typically goes to some sort of disaggregation deal, right? And then like, oh my God, real estate agents are going to lose, their jobs and they'll be totally useless and they'll take over. And like, yeah, but if you look at the overall trend, right? If I take 10 steps back and just look at society, as a whole, whether it's music production or Adam Carolla or 3D printing or any of the stuff we discussed, I kind of feel like we don't know, right? I mean, frankly, none of us really know what the result is, but certainly it feels to me like we might see something, something emerge, right? And it may not be real estate agents. It might be, dudes in a garage. Who knows? But I feel like one of the things that this democratization or de-assetification or popularization or whatever we want to call it, we know what we're talking about. We're talking about small groups of people and individuals having a lot more power and a lot more capability than they did before. If we think of it that way, I sort of feel like one of the things it does is it breaks rule systems. Right? It's hard to contain that sort of thing. So the advent of MP3 posed grave challenges for copyright for record companies, right? The advent of digital, content poses real challenges for guys whose business was to stamp out DVDs, So a lot of the rules, a lot of the older sort of systems that we put in place to try and control, and live in a world that really didn't have this widespread access to capability, I feel like those are the things that are probably going to get challenged. But what replaces is not necessarily worse. I mean, I don't think any of us want to go back to the days when we couldn't download music off iTunes, right? So I don't know, when I think of that, I'm like, there could be some really interesting, creative things coming out of even real estate. Now, it may be that some of the rules, some of the things that we all sort of take for granted, we'll be surprised, by how they get transformed. But, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of feel like the creative, people out there, whether they're real estate agents or brokers or consumers or what have you, I mean, I feel like the creative folks out there have the power in their hands to sort of do stuff. And there's not a whole lot that, any of us could do about it.
I feel the exact same way, Rob, because, if it's something that the real estate industry has a lot of, it's data. There's a lot of data on how people, use real estate information, feel about the real estate industry, and work with the people that work within the real estate industry. There's an overabundance of information, and the specific creative leveraging of that type of data into what we've framed in the past as magical experiences or innovation, if you like, in terms of really making these kind of seismic, logistic or rule-breaking kind of shifts that we've explored here. It's happening at a glacial pace at the moment. It's happening at an incremental pace rather than the kind of like 3D printing thing that we're talking about. I mean, I remember going to but that's just our experience of it. I mean, I remember going to going to a graphics conference 10 years ago, and 3D printing was being demoed there. So these things usually take a while to actually get to market, and then when your first experience is, oh, they're going to put 3D printers in Staples, because you've never heard of it before or just haven't had it on your radar, it seems absolutely mind-blowing and seismic. The truth is that it's been sort of brewing for years, right? And there are many, many instances of things appearing to be innovative that have actually been going for many, many years, right? Like people often cite like the Beatles. Like the Beatles is a great example of that. Like they were a band way before they started having hits. And, so because we're sort of close to that conversation internally within the real estate industry, we're experiencing those small incremental shifts, I think, as we slowly adopt mobile and, we get our hands around social and we start to hear the customer more and, those kind of things. Our experience of it isn't as sort of seismic as the kind of things that we're seeing elsewhere in other industries. Does that make sense?
I think it makes perfect sense, and I think the way I'm thinking about it is not only that, but the first iteration of any innovation, of any new technology or any new capability, tends to be bad. Right? You think about like the first automobile. None of us would want to drive in it. Right?
The first MP3 players with 30 buttons on them and stuff like that.
Or the first fax machine. Remember with the little curling paper? Or the first laser printer that was like the size of my cabinet, right? And then now we've got, I'm looking at my laser printer right now, and it's size of a bread box. So, I figure what's interesting about it is, as far as real estate goes, if we think of it that way, then clearly the Realtor.com, Zillow, the Trulia, all the stuff that we're all excited and energized about right now, wouldn't we have to look at them as Model T Ford and say, whether it takes 10 years or 20 years, in the future down the line, we're going to see sort of the refined models of all of this. That'll just kind of, make us look back on today and go, wow, yeah, remember those old days?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this year saw, you think about it, it's like the first commercial space flight, like a guy jumped out of a balloon and broke the speed barrier, all this kind of stuff. The amount of innovation that's actually happening in the world is staggering in comparison to the kind of things that we're talking about. Like the pace of technology, and one of the things, Gaylor, to your point, that Mary Meeker often talks about as being a huge thing that's going to happen next year is what's going to happen to medical data. She talks a lot about the healthcare industry and the sort of democratization of things like healthcare information and healthcare tools. And I think that's a particularly sort of fascinating space to watch. And she encompassed things like 3D printing as part of that conversation for things like replacement joints and teeth, that kind of stuff. So it's really sort of fascinating what's happening with the medical field, because in many ways it's sort of the convergent space for all of these technologies to actually happen all in one place.
Yeah, and as an industry, it's one where the stakes are high enough that people are willing to spend the money to figure it out, right? So like the bone stuff, like I remember reading a year or two ago when the first time someone they basically scanned someone's, left leg bone and made a right leg bone, and they were like, this would normally cost $300,000, and we used this 3D printer, and it worked, and it cost $20,000, which still sounds like a big number, but compared to what it would have been, and a huge difference, and significantly faster, so that they were able to really do a lot. And I think like the medical data side of it that's a huge one, and just in terms of one of the other sides, like about all the digital stuff, like while on the one hand it does offer up tremendous opportunity to like regular individuals, it also does present like in many cases a single workflow or a single flow of data. So like if like a pipe can get turned on or turned off, like we see this in countries where they don't want people to access the internet, but you can also see it here. So there's also issues there. I think like the regulation side on the medical industry is the big one of the big challenges. But they also have kind of reminded of I worked with a client a couple of years ago that does information related to neonatal emergency care, which is like a really challenging field. If we like babies that are born too soon or very sick, and they did kind of like basically like risk management, and that's like a really careful field for like in terms of both the legal side of handling that kind of data, but also I don't want to say marketing side, but it's kind of like that, where it's like if you're actively working to improve yourself, you don't necessarily want to talk about the times that you failed, but like that's what you need to do in order to improve. And I think that there's a ton of similarities almost with real estate data in that regard, where there's like willingness to talk about some kinds of data and unwillingness to talk about other kinds of data for fear of it looking bad or not looking bad. And I think those are some of the similar challenges moving forward that I think real estate will have to and will eventually, I think, excel at solving those things.
I agree.
So anyway, blah, blah, blah from Gaylord. I just looked on Skype and saw that I'm supposed to wrap it up because we're like cooking our time over. So this has been a lot of fun. I feel actually really energized and positive about the future of technology. So thank you guys for helping make that happen.
This was fantastic, man. We should have these positive things. And next week we could go all about the negative and the dark side.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
The destruction of the logistics chain, that will be topic number one.
Right.
Like last podcast, we talked about all the wonderful things because of 3D printing. This podcast, we're going to talk about 3D printing of nuclear materials.
Right. Totally.
At the end of this podcast, you'll want to invest in a dugout shelter.
Right. Which you can print for free. Print for free from Etsy. Downloadable nuclear fallout shelter.
That's right. Got it. Well, thank you guys so much. This is always fun as usual. So rock on.
All right. Have a great one, guys.
Bye.